And welcome back to Major Points with D Minor for the final 13 minutes. And the final bumper song for today is Remember the Time by the late king of pop, Michael Jackson. And we was talking with Richard Lim about, do you remember the time back in the day when, technology wasn't as prevalent as it is, but times have changed. And it just shows you how kind of like old we're getting,
Oh, gosh, yeah. Tell me about it.
I know, right? But before we went to commercial break, we was talking about Osama bin Laden and how we found out through Twitter and social media about his capture. And my question, because we're talking about culture, how does this affect the Middle East? How do you think this will affect the Middle Eastern culture as far as our relationship with the Middle East? I think we both can agree on that the capture of Osama bin Laden, indeed a huge symbolic victory for the United States, but this by no means means that the war on terror is over. And how do we try to improve relations within the Middle East and at the same time take a huge stand for the United States national security?
Well, that is a
mouthful.
Very complicated question. I guess, okay, so you're asking about how we can improve relations with the Middle East?
Improve and continue to have a dialogue with them. Right.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, I think, if you would have told anybody, an expert, on January 1st, 2011, we remember how recent that was, just about 5 months ago, that, a wave of the impulse of democracy would really strike all over, the Middle East, a large section of the Middle East and the Arab world, that, heads of state their pretty much their governments would be under threat of overthrow or at least protests, that, a leader like Mubarak, who had been in there for 30 years or so, would be swept out of office, and that we'd capture Osama bin Laden. I think most people would just say you're crazy. And I don't really know of any expert that had foreseen all of this. And so it's very unique. This year has been an incredible year because it's a very unique set of circumstances that are kind of converging, that are resulting in, major change. And I think people will look back at, say, what's being called now as the Arab Spring as a very substantial change in what's happening, in terms of governance over there. And I think obviously the Osama bin Laden killing was something I think is more of a symbolic kind of event rather than something of the same kind of substance or significance. Not to take anything away from it and take away from the justice of it, or the fact that it's something that I think has had a big impact on Americans in general. But I do think that this Arab Spring, it's an amazing confluence of events that's happening, at one particular point in time. As far as improving relations with the Muslim world, I think I'm kind of more of a realist in that sense, where I do believe tension will always exist. I mean, you go back to the founding of this country and people were talking about interest. George Washington talked about interest, and interest between nations will naturally conflict. That's just human nature. It's the same way that human being interest will conflict. And so I think it's a matter of managing what those conflicts are. And I think that when you look at what's going on right now in the Middle East, part of it is kind of looking where the tide of history is going. And I think the tide of history is going towards, greater public participation, greater democracy. That doesn't mean that thriving democracies will develop overnight, but it does mean that that's the direction it's going. And I think for the United States to do what it can to improve relations has to be on the right side of history, and know that that's where history is marching towards. It, the days of supporting autocrats are not completely over. They never will be, in my opinion, but they're marching on that direction.
The big debate now, Richard, and this has been an ongoing debate for several years, is now immigration. And, we want people to see America as culturally relevant and accepting of people of different nationalities, ethnic groups, different backgrounds.
Right.
How does America become culturally aware and culturally accepting without coming across as being anti-immigrant?
Well, you see, I think that is the big problem, is that on this issue you have a lot of demagoguery, and you have a lot of disingenuous people that have certain interests. And, for instance, there's an interest in keeping kind of an us versus them mentality, that we're immigrants and, this is the rest of America and they don't like us. And there's a certain interest that certain groups have in maintaining that in order to maintain support. And it's unfortunate because it's so divisive and it's not good. I have strong feelings on this issue because obviously I'm an immigrant myself. I was born in the Philippines. I came here when I was 2. And I think it requires responsibility on both sides. It's not just kind of, this is what America has to do, or this is what a group of people have to do. I think it's an issue that everyone has to work on. I think that, unfortunately, there is that perception that if you support legal immigration, that and not illegal immigration, that somehow you're anti-immigrant. And that's just flat out wrong. I'm an immigrant myself. My family waited in line for a long time, and I'm not saying that the process is perfect, but those are the laws, and they followed that. And for me, I believe that, I'm not saying that the system is fair, but I do think that that's the proper way to do it. It's like staying in someone's house. You follow the rules, you don't just get to barge in. And so at the same time, I do think that people that come to America need to have that appreciation. They need to have that kind of, we're coming here for a reason. We want to contribute. We there's a great country. We wouldn't be going here if it wasn't a great country. And we obviously want to preserve our culture, but we are going to participate in your culture and be a part of being American. So I think that's one thing. I do think that when it comes to, say, those who are strongly anti-illegal immigration, I think they need to take on this issue with love. I mean, they need to reaffirm that, hey, an illegal immigrant is a human being, and an immigrant is a human being. And so, we're all God's children, and in that sense, it's loving, I think, to expect people to respect the laws. And it's loving to address them as human beings, and kind of making that distinction. It's hard to do, and that's why I think that everyone kind of has to work together on it. It's not just this is what people, this is what Americans need to do, or this is what, people who are against illegal immigration need to do. I think it's something that everyone has to work at together.
Richard, we got about 4 minutes left in the program, and our culture, we seem to be more tolerant and accepting of people of different races and of different backgrounds. After all, we did elect the first African American president in 2008.
Right.
Culturally, what does this mean for our country as far as the future? Does this open up the door for other people of different cultures and nationalities or backgrounds to become president of the United States? Or is America tired of the quote-unquote old white man syndrome? What does this mean culturally for the United States?
Well, you see, I think that's a good question to ask, because it allows me to say that I think that's a flawed question, because I don't think the focus, I think too often people use certain benchmarks that are not good indications of where we are in race or anything like that. I mean, you're talking about the office of the President of the United States, and so many different factors go into deciding who becomes president. And if you look at who has become president, yes, people say, well, there have been 43 white Protestant males. That's true. But they're all very different types of human beings, and some of them were accidents. Some became president because, assassination. Some, weren't intended to be there at all, and somehow they, Gerald Ford never wanted to become president, but he was happened to be vice president when Nixon resigned, and and so
he's kind of the forgotten president,
Yeah. So I think to use that as a benchmark for race in general, I think people have kind of turned it into we must have this, and if I don't have an African American, if I don't have an Asian American president, somehow I don't enjoy these rights, which I just think is bogus. I mean, it's, I think any under that logic, anybody of any persuasion could, or any background or religious background or whatever, could just say, oh, well, my kind of person isn't president of the United States, and there's something wrong with this country. There's so many factors that go into deciding who's president of the United States.
Right.
Symbolically, the fact that a former slave-holding country elected an African-American president, it's a great symbolic thing. But in terms, if you want to talk about the substance and you want to talk about the racial issues, I think it's silly to take kind of one indication and say, oh, well, if the richest person in the world isn't Asian American, then, or richest person in America isn't Asian American, then I'm somehow suffering. I think it's much more complicated than that.
Right, and I do agree with you. We got about less than a minute left on the show. We've been talking politics and culture with my good friend Richard Lim, who's originally from San Diego, correct, Richard?
Yeah, Orange County, actually, but I did go to school in San Diego.
Right, Orange County, and I've been out to Orange County. It's a beautiful place. Went to the Richard Nixon Library. Speaking of culture, and that was a pretty fascinating place. What I like about Orange County, California, is that it is a culturally diverse place, and I love it. The weather out there is good. The people are very accepting, and the people are very friendly. And I felt like I was right at home.
You're getting me nostalgic now.
I'm feeling nostalgic myself.
Don't even talk about the weather.
All right. I'll leave it at that. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your contribution. And I really do appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Same to you, buddy. Well, that concludes Major Points with D Minor. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. Tune in to us next Sunday, 5 to 6 p.m. or WNRR1380.com. Have a good one, everybody.